recipe based on Miller's slip. David Miller was a potter, and he's gone now. He was a potter in France, of British origin. His recipe is 70% ball clay, 20% kaolin, and 10%, and he used a frit. I use 3124, and it works really well. So it's 70 ball clay, 20% EPK, and 10% 3124, and it works really well. And I usually add a little bit of sodium silicate to it. In this case, I think I've added about a half a teaspoon for about a gallon or so, a gallon and a bit. It's not critical how much. You just drop it a quarter teaspoon at a time, or drops at a time, until it doesn't flocculate as much. You want it to be able to run off the pot when you pour it, or it will just accumulate in too thick a coating. So that's what the sodium silicate does, and it's really good for that. So first thing we have to do is stir up the slip. I've got my little piece of wood here, and we just stir it up, assuming it was pretty good last time. If I knew it was thin last time, I would have taken off some of the water that accumulated on the top. But I remember it was perfect last time, and it wasn't that long ago that I did it. So it's probably pretty good right now. So we'll just give it a good stir. There are no lumps at all. If there are any lumps in this, you've got to re-sieve it. Useless to try and apply slip with lumps. Okay, so that's pretty good. Make sure I get everything up from the bottom. And we'll just put that over here. Now I have a gadget here which is incredibly useful. It's a hydrometer, but it's a homemade hydrometer, and I think I can show it to you here. That's the way it looks. It's a test tube, and it has silica sand in the bottom, enough to weight it down, and it has a scale on the inside, which I have. It's a completely arbitrary scale as long as the distances are equal. I've made them, I think, a centimeter apart, and they go from 1 to 16 or so, and I've taped that on the inside. Just see if you can see that, yeah. And then there's a cork in the top. And then all you have to do is put it in your container, make a note when you get your slip to the right consistency by adding water and getting it to the right consistency. You put this thing in, and you try to let it tends to flip over to one side or another, so you use your hand to keep it more or less vertical in the bucket. Make sure it's had enough time to sink to the bottom. And then you take this and you read it. And in my case here, it's about 6.5. And it's close enough for me. It's actually down around 6. So what that actually indicates to me is I better give it another stir. It might be a little wet. So I'm just going to give it another stir. You don't want to drop this thing. Thankfully, I never have. They're a little bit of a hassle to make. And so I'm just going to re-stir this a little bit more. See if in fact, the top part of the bucket may be a little thin, and the thicker slip may be at the bottom. So we'll try that again. That there. I've cleaned it and dried it off. And we'll just try putting it in again and see how we're doing. If it's too thin, there isn't really much I can do about it, except wait till next time and take off some of the water. it looks pretty good to me. It's about 6 1/4 instead of 6 1/2, but I'll just keep that in mind as I'm pouring. Maybe I'll pour it for just a little bit longer to get a little better coat. And so that's it with the hydrometer. Really useful tool. And the rest of it's going to go pretty fast from here on. Something to hold the slip, or something to pour it with, something to wipe the bottom, and some water to clean my sponge. And these were thrown maybe 4 days ago. They were trimmed about 2 days ago, and they've been sitting for about 2 days under plastic, completely under plastic, fairly tight, and that will even out the dryness of the plate. So you don't want it only dry on the edges and wet in here, or any other combination. You want it as evenly dried as possible, and this is very even. Now there is one thing that is critical here. The degree, this is leather hard, but it's a dry leather hard, and it's something you'll just have to experience. A wet leather hard is very soft. You can trim it usually at that stage, but you can't, and it will hold its shape nicely, but it's still too wet for slipping, because the slip is going to re-wet the whole pot, and if it's too damp at the leather, too wet in its leather hard stage, it will destroy the piece. It'll just crack and be useless. If it's too dry, you have other problems too, and it will also crack. So you have to get it just right. It has to still be able to take a fingernail mark, but not such a resistance that you really have to push, which I would call that black leather, which is really quite dry and almost just the precursor to starting to really dry to a hard state. So this one still will take a fingernail, and it's very even throughout, which is great. So it lifts very easily, doesn't distort, and this is a thing I will use, and you'll see me using it. It's a method for sliding the pot off of my hand onto the bat, and it's very useful. So we'll just bring this out here. I'm just going to wipe that. Bring it out. And we're almost ready to go here. We're just going to pour. Now, we're going to hold the plate like that. The foot, I made sure there was enough to hold on to when I trimmed it. We're going to pour it across here, and then we're going to turn it all the way around to the other side and do the other side, all in pretty much, very much one after the other. Okay, so here we go, and we just pour on there, like that, drip that in there like that. Some people will rotate this in a very fancy fashion, hopping it around on their hand. I don't do that. Make sure you get it all, and let her drip away. It's a beautiful part of the process. It's one of the most fun parts about slipping, is putting this on. It just looks like a beautiful chocolate, well, it's a white, a gray, but almost looks like a chocolate glaze on a cake. It's just beautiful. And I've got most of that off. I'm going to tilt it back because I don't want it to gather too much, too thick in there, because that has caused me cracking in the past. So I'm just tilting it back to get that little bit to pull away a little bit, and I want to do it before things dry out too much. Then I'm just going to check my underneath, and you can see you can leave those drips or you can take them out. And I basically take them out, and I sometimes leave one in just because I like the way it looks. but it depends a lot on my mood, and generally I don't do that. If it's accumulating in a thickness, a thick drip at the edge, you might want to just take that off, because that can add too much water to the edge, and that will cause cracking. You'll split your rim. And that's pretty good. You can see that that's pretty good. Pretty nice rim. And doesn't look like I've pooled too much anywhere. And now this is where this is very useful, because it's a little hard to get off my hand. I could flip it out, but I'll probably do something to the rim. If I use this little piece of plastic, it's just acetate from a stationery store. Hold it over the edge. Drop it down like that and pull it. It comes on very nicely, doesn't do any damage to the slip, and stays out of trouble. Newspaper can sometimes flick back up, and then capillary action will cause it to really stick onto the piece and make a mess of the underside there. And this doesn't do that. And it also means that now if I needed to, I could move it onto a board if I wanted to. So that's how you do the slip. And that now has to dry for probably pretty much until tomorrow morning. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it probably needs to dry. I will check it tonight before bed, but there's you can't cover it until it is absolutely dry to the touch. Don't let it get too dry, because you're going to apply more slip when you put your decoration on, and the more things can stay at the leather hard stage while you're working with slip, the better it'll be. Everything will shrink. There's a lot of clay in slip. Even the colored slips that I paint on all have a lot of clay in them, and that's in order to allow you to put a thick coat down, which will then shrink together with everything else. The clay, the white base slip, and everything else will just shrink together and be like one piece. So that's it. That's how you slip a plate.